On this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, the Ocean Reform Act passes the House 364 to 60, and global shipping is not happy. Hi, I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano at Campbell University, as you can tell, former merchant mariner and an instructor in maritime history, maritime security, and maritime industry policy. So the House of Representatives yesterday passed the Garamendi-Johnson Ocean Reform Act of 2021. And it has spurred a lot of issues concerning this. Obviously, the bill has not passed to become a law yet, still has to go to the Senate. And from what we understand, Senator Thune is introducing his own bill. So obviously, there's going to be a reconciliation of those two bills should the Thune version come out of the Senate. But let's talk about specifically what the Ocean Reform Act bill has in it right now. What's the reaction of global shipping, and why is this an issue at all? So here's the story on GCaptain. This is the Mike Schuller story. Came out last night, or actually this morning. U.S. House passes Ocean Shipping Reform Act to overhaul federal regulation for international ocean shipping. H.R. 4996 passed the House with a bipartisan vote. And as I mentioned to you before, it was jointly sponsored by Representative John Garamendi, Democrat from the 3rd District of California, and then Representative Dusty Johnson, the sole representative from South Dakota. And as they mentioned here, the goal was to make the FMC, the Federal Maritime Commission, a more effective federal regulator. They go on to say that the Ocean Shipping Reform Act will ensure a more competitive global ocean shipping industry, protect American businesses and consumers from price gouging, and establish reciprocal trade opportunities to reduce the United States' longstanding trade imbalance with export-driven countries like mainland China. Goes on here to talk about some of the bullet points that they identified in here, and I'm going to come back to these and talk about these. But there are several specific elements that is addressed in this. Similar story here by John Gallagher in American Shipper, talking about it. He also has his share of the bullet points right here. Updates requirements on ocean common carriers to incorporate best practices, requires ocean common carriers and marine terminal operators to certify that any demurrage or detention charge complies with FMC regulations or face penalties. Right now, people are being charged for not being able to get their containers off the terminal. I know you hear about hyper demurrage, what LA and Long Beach keep threatening to do, but people are being charged for their containers being on terminals, and they have no control over it. It is one thing if you purposely leave your container on a terminal. It is an entirely other thing if you go get your container and you can't get it because the yard or the terminal can't access it. And oh, by the way, we're going to charge you a late fee because you haven't removed your container yet. Well, I can't remove my container. You won't give me your container. Yeah, we're going to still charge you a late fee. That's the practices they're talking about. Limits exemption for marine terminal operators for any terminal detention, demurrage charge if such charges are based on public port tariffs set under state law, effectively codifies the FMC's interpretive rule on demurrage. This is Steve Ferrara's pet topic right here. If you don't follow Steve on LinkedIn, you should, and watch his show B2B on FreightWaves. Obligates ocean carriers to adhere to minimum service standards that meet the public interest determined by the FMC in a new required rulemaking. And then requires ocean carriers and marine terminals to maintain all records regarding invoice, demurrage, or detention charges for at least 5 years and provide such records to the FMC are invoiced. We also see it here. Sam Chambers has got this written up too on Splash 24/7. And if you go to the websites or the Twitter page, this is Representative Garamendi's, the Bipartisan Ocean Shipping Reform Act will, and he has the 4 main things he identifies. Interesting that they're using a Chinese Costco container ship in the background. I will say something, and I agree with some comments that have been out here. There has been some xenophobic issues with this bill that are being alleged, and I completely disagree with that. Number one, ocean shipping is an international trade. You can't do, this is not going to get everything back into the United States hands by any means, and I don't think we want that. But there are key things that are being addressed. This is also Representative Johnson's webpage that he had up where he's talking about it, and he does mention in here hold Chinese ocean carriers accountable. There is that element in there. And again, it's a bipartisan bill. Everybody's going to get their little piece of the bipartisan element here. And this issue is aiming to address a fundamental issue about the fact that the FMC has limited abilities to enforce any regulation at all when it comes to international shipping. And this has been happening for quite a while. The Shipping Act of 1984, the Ocean Reform Act of 1998 really limited the abilities of the FMC. And for example, number one, this is the annual report of the Federal Maritime Commission in 1984. It lists their regulatory responsibility, oversight of certain agreements of U.S. and foreign flag common carriers by water and other persons engaged in U.S. foreign commerce, receipt and review of tariff filings, guarding the rights of U.S. shippers and carriers engaged in foreign commerce, maintaining the rights of U.S. flag shipping companies to transport cargoes in foreign trades, regulation of rates, charges, classifications, tariffs, protection of U.S. ocean common carriers in the domestic offshore trade of the U.S., licensing of international ocean freight forwarders. And it goes on here. It has a whole list of what the mission of the FMC is. This is the mission of the FMC according to their 59th annual report, the one for 2020. The FMC mission is singular: ensure a competitive, reliable international ocean transport supply system that supports the U.S. economy and protects the public from unfair and deceptive practices. That's it. That's their mission. That's the mission that the FMC lists for themselves. And then they have a list of goals. Now, goals are not missions. Goals are things you hope to achieve. But that's it. They have a strategic goal: maintain an efficient and competitive international ocean transportation system, protect the shipping public from unlawful, unfair, and deceptive ocean transportation practices, and resolve shipping disputes. That's their goals. That's it. I would argue that the FMC, if you look back and you look at what the FMC was prior to 1984 to its creation in 1961, it was much more of a regulatory body with a lot more authority. It goes back to the original creation of this under the Shipping Board of 1916. And so the goal here is to provide some regulation, some control over what has been happening. Now, I will argue that this should have been done long before this hit the news. Let me be clear. I'm not a big fan of everything that's been done to deregulate the ocean shipping industry. Now, on the flip side, we've been a great benefit of that. We have benefited tremendously by this. Low transportation costs, it's been great. But I want you to be aware of some of the criticisms that are coming out. So for example, here is the Cato Institute. Cato Institute came out with this: Gabriella Beaumont-Smith, minimal government intervention and reliance on the marketplace are not the cause of inefficient ports. The breadth of regulations currently in place is causing the problem. So even though we've deregulated ocean shipping, the problem here is regulation in US ports, is what they're saying. And matter of fact, Cato has come out with a much longer policy statement, completely hammering the Ocean Reform Act and arguing that we should do to domestic shipping what we've done to ocean shipping and deregulate it and open it up for foreign business. The World Shipping Council, my favorite organization in the world by name, states this. This is the statement of John Butler, the president of the World Shipping Council. The House today passed H.R. 996 without proper debate or committee process. Again, it was passed 364 to 60. So I think there is plenty of time for debate and committee process here. But again, this is the World Shipping Council, which is the official lobby. That's what they are. They're a registered lobbyist for ocean carriers, the big shipping companies. The bill is a political statement of frustration with supply chain challenges, frustrations that ocean carriers share. Okay, where were you then in coming up with changes and reforms? Again, ocean carriers have been amazingly absent. You don't see them anywhere. They're not on the news. They're not out there. They shy away from any public attention. And they sure have not been advocating for what kind of reforms to go through, because let's be clear, they don't. They're making mega profits right now. And there's nothing wrong with making profits. I am a capitalist by heart. Believe me, I invest to make money. But when you're making record profits, when you've made more in 10 months than you've made in the past 10 years, times 3, then I would argue you may have an obligation to sit there and say, okay, what should we be doing to benefit and make sure everything is happening? And Butler came out with this statement. The problem is the bill is not designed to fix the end-to-end supply chain congestion that the world is experiencing, and will not and cannot fix that congestion. The World Shipping Council will continue to work with the Congress to seek real solutions that further strengthen the ocean transportation system that has supported the U.S. economy through the pandemic. Okay, great. Let's hear from his own words, because he was up on the Capitol Hill just the other day. He was up there giving a talk. So Butler was asked, and Butler is the CEO of the World Shipping Council, former attorney for them, now CEO, was asked by Senator Wicker of Mississippi a specific question regarding the proposed House legislation. This was back on Tuesday.
To amendments to the Shipping Act, some of which I think would be detrimental.
Okay, well, specifically tell us what not to do.
Okay, well, there, for example, in the House bill that's being considered probably this week,
Which is passed.
this is an example of the conflicting signals that I was talking about in my opening statement. There's one provision in that bill that says you have to, as a carrier, you have to provide adequate equipment to everybody who wants to ship. The next provision says you have to put exports on the ship before you can put any empty containers for repositioning on the ship. Now, as I said earlier, in normal times, we can balance that even though we have a 2-to-1 imbalance of imports to exports. We can work around that. But in times of scarcity, it becomes very difficult. And those some of the things we've talked about here
Okay,
today.
well,
So what he is talking about and what he's saying right there is the Shipping Act is requiring him, the new Reform Act, if it gets passed, would require that U.S. exports in containers be prioritized over empty containers, which is happening right now. It's happening right now. Their exporters cannot get their goods out. Matter of fact, Representative Johnson has a statement where about $1 billion in the dairy market is not getting out to market. So when he sits there and says, well, you know, it's conflicting, it creates this conflict. Well, yes and no. First off, the ratio of imports to exports in containers is usually 2-to-1, but it's almost 3-to-1 right now in terms of loaded versus empties. So there are plenty of empty containers going out, and understand what he's talking about. What he's talking about is they want empty containers heading over to Asia so that those empty containers can be sent directly to a factory or a warehouse or wherever it needs to go, be packed and sent right back to the port. What they don't want is a full container showing up in Asia, because then that container has to be sent somewhere, unpacked, and then shipped to a warehouse distribution site to be loaded and packed, and it slows down the process. But understand, slowing down the process coming out of Asia to the United States is not a bad thing right now. Because what we have is this massive tilt of goods coming out of Asia into the United States. The west-east flow across the Pacific is the problem that we're seeing. We need to slow that down. Now, understand the government's trying to slow that down by inflation, by making things more expensive. But if you shorten the number of containers that are available, that does the same exact thing. And let's be clear again. Ocean carriers are using U.S. ports, U.S. terminals by the allowance of the U.S. government. We're allowing them into our waters and allowing them in. And I understand we don't want government oversight and control over things. And you're going to see in the comments of this YouTube video, I guarantee you, people going on and off about Sal wants socialism and Sal wants government control of everything. I really don't. What I want is a return back to a modicum of what we had prior, where there is some oversight in the ability to issue rates and controls. One of the things that you hear talked about is that, and even Butler said this in his talk, that, you know, the news is talking about the spot rates, and that's what they're talking about. Well, spot rates, how much of spot rates make up the actual container shipping market? And oh, by the way, what's happening right now as the ocean carriers renegotiate long-term rates? They're going up. And so the World Shipping Council has made more money than they ever did. And Butler says that in his thing. You know, he says, we're not used to this. We don't know what to do. Well, at the same time, there needs to be reform and legislation that is in place to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Understand, big shippers, big shippers like Amazon and Walmart and IKEA and Home Depot are finding ways around this. They're chartering vessels, they're bringing stuff in, but the smaller companies are really at the mercy of the big ocean carriers. And, you know, one of the things that he's identifying and blaming are NVOCs, these non-vessel ocean common carriers. These middlemen are buying up space on the vessels. Well, they've been around for as long as ocean carriers have been around for. This system has been in place. The problem is no one has paid attention to it. And the time you pay attention to it is when the system is under stress. The reforms that are being put in place now are meant for the future, not for right now. Yes, there's no single magic sword that fixes this. The Ocean Reform Act of 2021 will not fix the problem, but it will address some issues that probably need attention. Is it perfect? No, we can go down and break it piece by piece, and I can make some recommendations and others would make recommendations of what it is. But again, I go back to the previous video we just did on the FMC report of 2015, where they identified a lot of these issues. So we'll keep following the story. We'll see what happens and what comes out of the Senate and whether this bill eventually becomes a law. We'll have to do some Schoolhouse Rock. And we will keep you posted on it. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please subscribe, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos when they come out. Give it a thumbs up, leave a comment. I know some of you will leave comments. You can't help yourself, you dogs. And if you like it, share it across social media. And if you can, because I am a capitalist and I do believe in the capitalist economy, contribute to my Patreon page. Help me stay clothed in camel gear so that I can come to you in my bright orange with my camel symbols here for you. But more importantly, it allows me actually to do the research and time needed to put these videos together. So until the next video, Sal signing off.